There's a number that keeps appearing across HR retention studies, and it doesn't move much regardless of industry or company size. Somewhere between 50 and 80% of employees who accept a counteroffer from their current employer are gone within 12 months anyway. Some studies put it closer to 90. The companies running these retention programs know this number. They track it internally, and they make the counteroffer anyway. That's the part worth examining. Nate has been at the company for 4 years. It's a Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the overhead lights feel slightly too bright, and every meeting has already run long. He submits his resignation letter to his manager, mentions he's received an outside offer, and expects either a handshake or a conversation about transition timelines. What he gets instead is a request to sit down. And within 20 minutes, Nate has a counteroffer on the table. A salary adjustment, a title change, vague language about a new project that would position him well for the next level. Nate feels for a moment that he's been seen. That feeling is the mechanism. The counteroffer isn't primarily a retention tool. It's a time-buying instrument, and the time it's buying isn't for Nate. When an employee resigns, they trigger a set of operational costs that happen in sequence: backfill recruitment, interviewing bandwidth, onboarding time, institutional knowledge loss, productivity gap during transition. Studies tracking corporate turnover costs have put the all-in replacement figure at anywhere from 50 to 200% of that employee's annual salary, depending on seniority. The counteroffer, even a generous one, is almost always cheaper than that replacement cost in the short term. HR knows this arithmetic. So does the manager who just closed the door. What Nate doesn't know is that a calculation has already been made, and it doesn't include him staying long-term. Here's the first layer of how it works. The counteroffer is economically rational for the company, regardless of whether it actually retains the employee. It buys 3 to 6 months of continuity, delays the recruitment cost, and keeps institutional knowledge in the building during a period when losing it would hurt the most. If Nate leaves in 11 months instead of in 4 weeks, the company has extracted more value from the transition. It has spread the disruption out. The counteroffer converts a sudden break into a managed attrition timeline. Nate, meanwhile, thinks the timeline is about his career. He takes the offer. The title change is real. The salary bump is real. The project they mentioned, the one that would position him for the next level, is real in the sense that it exists. Whether Nate will lead it is a different question, and nobody in that closed-door meeting answered it directly. Here's what shifts the moment Nate signs back in. He has revealed something that cannot be unrevealed. He has demonstrated that he was looking, that he received an offer, and that he was prepared to leave. In the language organizations actually use internally, Nate has been flagged as a flight risk. That flag doesn't disappear because he accepted the counteroffer. In many HR systems, it becomes more visible. The downstream effects are quiet, and they take a few months to accumulate. Nate isn't excluded from meetings. He isn't treated coldly. Nothing is done to him in any direct or visible way. What happens is more structural. When the next planning cycle comes around, and it comes around faster than people expect, usually within a quarter, decisions get made about who is being developed for what. Those conversations happen in rooms Nate isn't in. And in those rooms, the question that gets asked about any key role is some version of, who can we count on to still be here in 18 months? Nate's name carries a footnote now. The new project does start. Nate is involved. But the actual leadership of it migrates, gradually, towards someone else. Someone who never handed in a resignation letter. Someone whose loyalty hasn't been quantified and found to have a price. This isn't malicious, it's resource allocation logic. Organizations don't invest heavily in developing people they've already assessed as likely departures. And they've assessed Nate. He told them everything they needed to know. Here's the second layer. The counteroffer doesn't just buy time, it extracts information. The moment an employee negotiates a counteroffer, they've disclosed their market value, their dissatisfaction threshold, and the approximate conditions under which they'd leave. That information lives in the system. It shapes compensation decisions in the next cycle, because the company now knows the minimum number required to keep Nate from walking. And minimum numbers have a way of becoming default numbers. There's a phrase that shows up in management consulting literature around retention strategy. Counter offers buy loyalty data, not loyalty. The distinction matters. Operating clearly inside this system means making a different set of decisions before the counteroffer conversation happens. The moment you receive an outside offer, you are holding information that has a very short window of genuine power. That window closes the second you disclose it to your current employer. If you intend to leave, leaving is the move. The counteroffer conversation is not a negotiation. It's a disclosure event. You're not extracting concessions. You're telling them what you know about yourself. If you intend to stay, the calculus is different, but it requires being honest about why you're staying. Not the salary, not the title. Whether the organization has actually changed the conditions that made you look in the first place. If those conditions are structural, headcount constraints, a manager who isn't going anywhere, a promotion path that's been frozen for 2 years, a salary adjustment doesn't alter them, it finances them. The third position, and it's the one most people don't consider, is using the outside offer without disclosing it. Quietly accepting the new role, giving standard notice, and leaving without triggering the counteroffer conversation at all. You preserve the relationship, you don't hand over your leverage data, and you don't spend the next 9 months watching a door that's already been quietly measured for a replacement frame. Here's the third layer, and it's the one that closes the loop. While Nate is recalibrating his expectations and telling himself the situation has stabilized, the company has quietly begun the process it was always going to run. Not a full backfill search, something quieter, a conversation with a recruiter, a job description drafted but not posted, an internal candidate being assessed against the role Nate currently holds. None of this is visible to Nate. It doesn't need to be. The company isn't replacing him yet. It's reducing the risk of being caught unprepared when he eventually goes. That's a meaningful difference. It also means that by the time Nate decides to leave for good, the transition plan is already half written. By month 4, Nate senses something. The project is moving, his title is accurate, his salary is higher than it was, but the access he expected, the strategic visibility that was implied in that closed-door conversation, hasn't materialized. He starts paying attention to which meetings he's being included in versus which ones are being recapped to him after the fact. He starts noticing that the manager who counter-offered him has become slightly less available. Not unavailable, slightly less. He gets assigned to a cross-functional working group, the kind that has a lot of participants and unclear ownership. It's visible work, but it's lateral. He can feel the difference between being given responsibility and being given activity, even if he can't name it cleanly yet. He starts updating his resume again. He doesn't tell anyone. This is the pattern the retention data is actually capturing. The employees who accept counteroffers and leave within a year aren't leaving because the money was wrong. They're leaving because the organizational position they thought they'd recovered never fully returned. The counteroffer restored the compensation. It didn't restore the trajectory. Nate leaves at month 9. Not in a dramatic way. He gets another offer, similar to the first one, and this time he doesn't mention it to anyone. He puts in his notice on a Thursday morning. His manager, to Nate's surprise, doesn't ask him to sit down. The door stays open. That detail, the open door, is the one that tells you everything about what the company understood and when. The counteroffer conversation was never about whether Nate would stay. It was about when he would go. They'd already run the math the second time. So would he.